Audio Jungle.
Welcome back, everyone, to our next class. I really enjoyed the material that was covered earlier by Magran. I think it's so incredibly helpful for us to look at the practicals of preaching, of sermon delivery, of putting together a sermon. What are the grand ideas? And what I want to do in this session is just briefly talk about preaching in a postmodern context. I firmly believe that we need to understand the environment in which we are called to serve. And the environment is not the same as 10 years ago, it's not the same as 20 years ago. The world is rapidly changing. You don't have to watch the news to know this. You just have to talk to your friends in the world, to watch movies, to see what is currently being, in some ways, forced upon us by cultural shifts, to understand that something is changing. But before we do that, I just want to run through two slides quickly, just touching on something that we mentioned earlier. If you guys are interested, at some point, maybe early next year, I can do a quick Zoom class on two items that I was able to teach on probably about in August. The first one is demons and unclean spirits. It's an interesting class because we go into for example the book of Mark 1 and Mark 5, talking especially about why Mark starts with the book of Mark starts with a man released from a demon, and Mark 5 moves to legion. What is the significance of those passages, and what role did the book of Tobit, the book of Jubilees, and the book of Enoch play as background in those? And the second one is Apocalypse and Resurrection. That's a short class that focuses on understanding why sometimes there's a different picture of the afterlife pictured in the book of Corinthians versus the book of Revelation, and there we delve a little bit into the book of Second Enoch and the book of Baruch. So it's faith building, but it gets complicated. But right now I want to talk about postmodernism, and the question that you might have is, why this session? Why did I decide to include this? It's very important for us to understand the terrain that we are navigating right now. The competing worldviews being thrust upon us in a very rapidly changing society. For many people, the optimism of modernity, in other words, the fact that there are technological advances, that there seems to be answers offered by science, that religion always seems to have the answer to society's problems, is being rapidly replaced by a distrust of everything that came before. Everything is being questioned. The norms of society are being questioned. Revealed truth is being questioned, and faith in God itself is being questioned. So we need to be aware of these things. So what is a postmodern context? The answer is, it's complex, and it depends on who you ask. If you were in the art world, postmodernism has a completely different meaning to a societal context or a ethical context. Every discipline of humanities and science has a different explanation for it. But for our purposes, we could define it as an incredulity. In other words, a mistrust of meta-narratives. In other words, of overarching narratives. And this is one of the greatest concerns. It's a mistrust of fundamental overarching themes. Just go back here. Postmodernism includes the view that no story can have more credibility than any other story. In this view, all stories are equally valid, being so validated by the community that shares them. And today, if you reach out, especially in a campus environment, you will discover that different groups cry out and for credibility. And the moment you share about your worldview, it is immediately countered by another worldview, and a view that what makes your story more credible than mine, because my story has equal value in my context. And of course, postmodernism is also known for relativism. In other words, there are no absolutes. Everything is relative to everything else. And also, of course, there is no objective truth. We'll just run through a few things here. Let me just move this out of the way. There we go. This is a famous extract from Friedrich Nietzsche. You guys might have heard one famous statement out of that. I'll just read it for us briefly. He wrote, "The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. 'Whether is God,' he said, he cried. 'I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers, but how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe up the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as though through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him." He wrote this in 1887. And that's probably the defining sentiment that the 20th century started with, and probably defines our modern era of post-modernity. A very cynical view of society, but Friedrich Nietzsche is known for that statement, God is dead, but he wrote this as part of almost like a parable, a play. But he wrote with a profound understanding that when society rejects God, they have nothing to replace him with. Sure. And he defines this, and it starts off with a madman uttering these words. It's not a sane man. And it's an insanity that has gripped the world. And this is not necessarily a short message about how do we address this, but an awareness of this. Postmodernity is effectively a view that self-destructs. Because when you question the statements it makes about itself, they are fundamentally flawed. For example, a view that you often hear today that there is no truth. You can ask that person, is that statement true? Or when someone says there are no absolutes, you can say, is that an absolute? These are humorous, but they fundamentally show that the whole philosophy collapses in itself. Another one, no one can know any truth about religion. One might ask, and how precisely did you get to know that truth about religion? Or You can't know anything for sure. Are you sure about that? Or what about the second last one? Talking about God is meaningless. What exactly does this statement about God mean? And lastly, you can only know truth through experience. One might counter, what experience taught you that truth? But you can think about these later. I'd like to end off this short, it's really just a short note on the society we live in, with this note from Colossians 2. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than that of Christ. Sometimes we can read this and we can read this as a simple statement, as if human tradition and elemental spiritual forces are the same thing. But in Paul's mind, if you read all his other writings, he sees the spiritual forces of this world as a separate reality that we are swimming in like fish in a bowl, but we can't see it. So we need to be aware that these are, I hesitate to say demonic, but they are spiritual forces that are at war with us. So when we prepare messages, be aware that those that you preach to have spent a week being subjected to this. And views have altered, views have shifted. So when we preach, we need to be aware that there are counter narratives that are being whispered in ears. Movies that people have watched have taught them acceptance of things that they would never thought would have been acceptable.